Welcome to the tutorial. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make multiplayer quite quickly in GDevelop. Now, this is part of a series where we're going to be making a multiplayer platformer, but in this part, we're going to be simply showing you how to set up a game lobby, and then I'm also going to be showing you how to set up two players that can be played individually from two separate devices. Now, the first thing we need to do is have and start up a game lobby. Now, I have two scenes here. I have a lobby scene, then I also have a gameplay scene. What you want to do, you'll automatically have one by default. But create a new scene, name it lobby or whatever you want. And now let's start. Now, basically what we want to do is when we click a button, we want to open up the game lobbies. And once the lobby has started, once the people have filled it up, then we want to change to our gameplay scene and do specific things when we get in there. Now, of course, we're going to want to make a button. So I'm going to add a new object. And if you scroll down, you have a panel sprite button. And these are really good buttons that automatically have certain events that can easily be used. I'm just going to use this simple button right here. It doesn't matter which one you use. So I'm going to import this button. Let's rename it to something that makes more sense. I'm going to rename it to lobby button, so it's not something really long. And then I'm going to put the text here as start lobby. And that's it. That's all we're going to do right now. And I'm actually going to change the color to black as well, since we have kind of a white background so we can see it better. And we can have it as start lobby. Now, it looks kind of sloppy. It doesn't really matter too much. We can stretch it out and then it'll look much better. But now we have the button. Now what we want to do is when we click this button, then we want to open the game lobby. So we're going to go into a lobby events and add an event. Now I'm going to add a condition, and the first condition we want to check if the button is clicked. And like I said, when you have a button object, it'll have these conditions, and now I can check whether or not this button has been clicked. So now since I can check this button has been clicked, I can use that as the first condition. Now you may think that's the only one we need, but we actually need another condition, and that's to check to see whether or not a game lobby has already been opened. Because if the game lobby screen has already been opened, we don't want to just be able to keep opening up other game lobby windows. So I'm going to add another condition, and this is going to be and. So we're going to go to events and control flow, add and now I'm going to add another condition, and I'm going to go into other conditions. And if I scroll down, you'll see that we have multiplayer, and this is new because GDevelop used to not have all of this. And now I'm going to go into lobbies. And now we can check if the lobby game, let's see, if the window is open. We check if the lobby windows is open. And we want to check if it's not open. So we're going to invert this condition. So if I read this in English, it basically says if the lobby button is clicked and if the lobby window is not open, then what do we want to do? Now what we want to do is we want to open up a lobby. So I'm going to go into other actions, scroll down, and we're going to open up a lobby. So open game lobbies, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, if I preview this, let's see what happens. If I preview, I click the button, and you'll see that will open up a window. Now, if you have not ever authenticated in-game, if you've never authenticated your GDevelop, basically authentication is basically setting up your account so you can use GDevelop's multiplayer. You're going to have to sign up with your GDevelop account or make a new one if you don't have one. But eventually, this will load up, and you can join a lobby. Now, we want to do something. We want to load up the next scene when this game lobby is ready. So basically what I want to do, I'm going to add a new event, add a condition, go into other conditions, and scroll down and go into lobbies, and we're trying to check if the lobby has started. We're trying to check if it has started. So if the lobby game has started, then we want to load in our new gameplay scene, which we already have set up. So let's add an action, go into other actions, scene, and then let's change our scene. So we're going to change the scene, and we're going to change this into the lobby. So basically what we're saying, if the button is clicked and a lobby window is not open, we open the game lobbies, and then once the game lobbies have filled up, then we're going to change the scene to our gameplay scene. Now, you may be wondering, how do we know if this is actually going to work for several people? Well, the way that you can preview for several people, you can go into this drop-down menu next to preview. There's a drop-down menu. You can click this, launch the preview, and you can launch the preview in up to 4 different windows. Now, GDevelop, I believe it can actually support up to 8 players, but I think you need to pay for like a higher version of GDevelop. But for now, we're going to just launch it in 2 windows. We're only going to be dealing with 2 players. So this is how it's going to look. These are 2 separate screens for 2 different players. So if I start the lobby on this screen, it's going to take a little bit to load up. And you'll see that it hasn't started on this scene because these are 2 different preview windows. So even though I've clicked it on that scene, it has not loaded up the lobby for the other player. Now this is going to take a bit, so I'm going to cut this part out until it loads up. Okay, so now that it's loaded up, we can join our lobby on this screen. And now when we join this lobby, I'm going to do a little bit more loading. GDevelop is doing a lot of loading today. But then I'm going to click join on this screen as well. And then another lobby window should open up. Now, it sometimes doesn't take this long to load. It really depends on the GDevelop servers at the time. But you'll see that I have two of the game devs in here, this is kind of definitely not natural. But since both of them are ready, when both players are ready, the host can start the game. Now, the host naturally will be the person who joined first. So player 1 right now is the host, so they're the only one who can start the game. If I look on my other screen, that's not there. So I'm going to start the game on the host screen. And now once the game is started, it'll load up our gameplay scene. Now, you'll already see that we have something in here because I already have something that's kind of pre-set up. Now, I'm going to show you guys how we can set up a platformer very simply, in a very simple way, where we can move both players individually. Now, let's go into our gameplay scene that I already have set up. Now, just to show you, I already have this set up, but it's not hard, so it's not going to be like you have to take forever. What we have here is a player object. It's a simple sprite. And if we go into our behaviors, we have two behaviors. We have the multiplayer object, which we're going to talk about later, and then we have the platformer object. And then I hit apply, and then I go into my ground or my platform, and this just simply has a platform behavior that works with the platformer extension. Now that we have this, I'm going to drag another player onto the screen, and I'm going to explain something. Now, if I click into our player, and we go into our behavior, you'll see that I'm going to actually delete this so we can recreate it, just to see how it works better. I'm going to add another behavior, and I'm going to type in multiplayer. Now, let me type it in fully. Now, this will allow the object to be synchronized with other players. Now, this doesn't matter because we're going to change this, but you can change the player who's owning this object as either the host, which is by default player 1 anyway, but player 1, player 2, and it goes all the way up to player 8. We can leave this default, but also I have a variable right here called player. And this is because in GDevelop and multiplayer, when you start the game, you basically have to assign your player to a certain number. And we're going to be using this variable to assign our player at the beginning of the scene. Each player, they're going to be assigned to their number, which they are. So this may not make 100% sense yet because it won't make 100% sense until we actually start making something. Now, just think of it like this way. When you're using this variable player, you can assign each of your objects a certain player. Let's say we want this one to be player 1. Well, it's variable right here, the instance variable or the object variable is set to 1. And if I click into this one, we want this player to be player 2. This is very important. If the more players you want to have to set these variables up correctly. So since we only have 2 players that are possible in this game, we want this player to be set to player 2. So I'm going to click into the variable and click and make it player 2. Now, this is not going to do anything yet because we have no events. Now we want to set up a few events for our platformer. Now, the first thing we need to do is actually make a check. At the beginning of the scene, we basically need to assign each of our players to the player in which they're supposed to be. Now, this is kind of a technique that I've learned from looking at example projects when it comes to multiplayer, and this is how it's done. Now, first, of course, you want to have an at the beginning of a scene condition because we want to check something at the beginning of a scene. Now, we want to add a sub-event to this. I'm going to explain this later. And basically, the reason why we're adding a sub-event is because we want to constantly be checking this. Because at the beginning of the scene, it only checks it once. So if we were not to add a sub-event, it will only check it once. So if a player were to join again, it will probably miss it because it's only checking it once the scene starts for the first time. Now, we're adding a sub-condition and we're leaving it blank. So basically, at the beginning of the scene, it'll keep just checking. It'll check several times at the beginning of the scene. And now we want to assign our player to its designated player value. So I'm going to add an action, go into our other actions, and if I scroll down into the multiplayer, we're going to go into, well, not lobbies. I'm going to go into my player first, and then we want to put the player object ownership. Now you see that we have the thing called player number. We're trying to set our player to be equal to, a certain player number, and that's what we have our player variable. So I'm going to set this to player. And the number that we want to set each player to is player.player. So basically what's happening, you see that we have these object variables right here. This one's set to 1. This one's set to 2. When the first player joins, whoever joins first, it'll set them immediately. It'll immediately set them to the player 1, player.player. This is based on that player variable. And since this one has a player variable that's set to 2, it'll set this one to player 2. Whoever joins second will be player 2. So that's basically how that works. Now, We can't play our game yet. We need to do something else. Now, we have to set up something where we can only move our player. Our players can only move if they're owned by another player. Now, we're going to be using a lot of what I call techniques. These are very specific things that are kind of dependent on multiplayer, that you wouldn't be used to doing things this way. I'm going to explain it after. Hopefully it makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to add a condition, and we want to check if the player is owned. The player is owned. So I'm going to click to our player, and we're checking if our object is owned by the current player. If it's owned by the current player, and this applies for each of our player objects. Now we want to check. We want to check if our player is owned by its current player. Then we're going to add some sub conditions, and we're going to basically make the movement from there. Because if we don't use this, you may think, well, we should automatically just be able to control our players. Well, if that happens, the game will get confused, and it'll actually delete the other player. Like, it's really weird. It's really weird. It's hard to explain that type of stuff. But I'm going to add a sub condition to this. Hopefully this all makes more sense when we're actually completely done with it. But I'm going to add a sub condition to this. Now I'm going to click a condition and other conditions. If the left key is pressed, we want to simulate the left key for our player. And I'm going to copy and paste. I'm actually going to speed this part up because it's very tedious and we're going to be doing the same thing. So here we have it. So basically we're checking if our object player is owned by its current player. If left key is pressed, we simulate the left key. If right key is pressed, we simulate the right key. And if the space key is pressed, we simulate the jump key. Now you know that these are basically just the default controls. But like I said, if we don't set it up in this way by using this technique, our objects will destroy themselves because the game doesn't really know which one to control. So the game really gets confused. So we have to check to see if it's owned by its current player. Now, the way that you play this scene and test it out, you cannot just have a drop-down menu. You cannot be in the gameplay scene and then start a preview with 2 windows. You always have to start in the lobby first. So once again, I'm going to start in the lobby, and I'm going to launch a preview in 2 different windows. And I'm going to start 2 lobbies. Hopefully this doesn't take really long. GDevelop, have your servers working, please. Have your servers working, but I'm going to wait for these to load. And this first one has loaded up. Let's see if the second one loads up. Okay, the second one loads up. So we join with one player, then we switch to the other screen, and we join with the other player. Now it's going to take a bit for them to join. You'll see that's loading right now. And it's joining with that player, and now it's joining with the other player. And now, since both of the players are ready, we're going to start the game. It'll load up the new scene. And now when it loads up, you'll see that one of the player objects, it just destroyed itself. Okay, so I finally found out the true solution. The true solution is an advanced property on our player. So we set up everything right to begin with. So if I go into our gameplay scene, if I double click into the player and you go into the behaviors, you see that in advanced properties, you have something called an action when player disconnects. And by default, it will destroy the object. But what you want to do is put do nothing. And the reason why you want to put do nothing is because sometimes your connection can be unstable, like how mine was. That's why this happened. It can be unstable, and sometimes your internet's just unstable. For a split second, your player will disconnect, and then it'll destroy the player. So that's why that was happening. My connection was unstable. So by default, you want to set this to do nothing, because sometimes things can just happen where your internet just randomly spikes and disconnects for a second. So you want to put do nothing to make sure the player never gets destroyed, even when it disconnects for a small amount of time. So that is how you set up multiplayer in GDevelop. That's how you make 2 players move individually. And I want to let you all know that this is a series. You can input what you want for this series, what you want to see in this series, and I may be able to put it in there. No promises of what I'm going to be able to put in there because many people have requests. But you can request what you want to be added to this series in terms of important platformer features for a multiplayer game. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below of what tutorials you'd like to see next, what can be improved in the tutorials. But if you also enjoyed this video, once again, make sure to subscribe to make sure you never miss out on any of the new videos, and hit the notification bell so you're notified whenever I post new tutorials. Once again, this is Q the Game Dev, and signing out.